चलो आज का टॉपिक है डिग्रीज ऑफ इलास्टिसिटी ऑफ सप्लाई। डिग्रीज ऑफ इलास्टिसिटी ऑफ सप्लाई। इलास्टिसिटी ऑफ सप्लाई लास्ट डे हमने डिस्कस किया। इट इज degree of, it shows degree of responsiveness of quantity supply of a good due to change in its price. When the price of a good changes, what is the degree of responsiveness? कैसा रेस्पॉन्स सप्लाई दिखाती है जब प्राइस चेंज होता है? So some goods show more response and some goods show less response. So there are so many goods when their price changes by a small percentage, their supply increases by a large percentage as compared to price change. But there are some goods whose response is same as price changes. And there are some goods whose response is very less as compared to its price change. So these things we discuss in the degrees of elasticity of supply. So degrees of elasticity shows that some goods shows less response, some goods more response. On the basis of responses, we categorize the goods, or we categorize the elasticity of demand, the elasticity of supply in degrees. So first of all, we will take the unit elastic supply. There are 5 elasticities of supply. First is unit elastic supply. You write down unit elastic supply or unitary elastic supply. Unitary elastic supply or unit elastic supply. So in this degree of supply, we see when a price changes by a given percentage or by a given proportion, the supply changes by the same percentage or by the same proportion as price change. For example, if there is 10% change in price, the supply also changes by equal 10%, neither more than 10% nor less than 10%. Yes, when quantity supply of a good changes by the same percentage or by the same proportion as price changes, as there is change in price, that supply is called a unit elastic or unitary elastic. So we can write down it when a given change in price leads equal change in quantity supply, it is called unit elastic supply or unitary elastic supply. Unitary elastic supply. For example, if 10% change in price leads same 10% change in supply. So price go 10% change up and down, supply te gayi yehi barabar 10% up या down, तो अच्छे इस वना यह गई unitary elastic supply. ठीक है? Athmas आसान coefficient of elasticity of supply or value of elasticity of supply is 1. That is ES आसान बराबर 1. ये तो रात हेचनो में कल मैंने आपको दिखाया how to calculate the elasticity of supply from the formula. जब भी तुम्हारा वैल्यू 1 आएगा तो उसमें आप लिखना है this is unitary elastic supply. So there is equal change in supply as change in price. Yuta change prices must I tuti supply must. For example, we can this explain it with the help of a supply schedule. How to make supply schedule for a unitary elastic supply. We have price price supply rules much as a price the quantity supply. If for example price is 40, price is 40 and quantity supply is for example 100, quantity supply is 100. If we increase price, by 50%, as per price 50% increase, 10% core increase 50%, that means change in price is 20 here. 20 divided by 40 into 100, 21 is 22 is 250 is go 50% change. Here we have changed the price by 50%. The supply thing is barabar 50%. Supply also changes by equal 50%. ये 50% change करो ये बन for example $1. So price change is 50% and supply change is also 50%. This is the case of unit elastic supply. Go unit elastic supply. Exactly. अगर इस बनाओ supply करो किस ऐसे unit elastic supply ये ऐसे तम साथ किस ऐसे elastic ये supply करो ऐसे तम साथ 45 degree line किस ऐसे 45 degree line ये ऐसे तम साथ supply करो. It will be a 45 degree line. Yes is 1. अगर सन price ऐसे 40, supply 100, price goes 60, supply goes 150. So here the elasticity of supply is 1. Elasticity of supply is agar O y petao is price, O x petao is quantity supply. So this is unit elastic supply. So you must remember that the supply curve is 45 degree line sloping upwards. So shape of the supply curve is 45 degree line sloping upwards, or a positive sloping supply curve with 45 degree angle. Exactly as 45. Divider you make the 45 degree angle. That supply will be unitary elastic. So when same change in price, when a given change in price leads same change in quantity supply or equal change in quantity supply. 10% change in price leads 10% change. 50% change in price leads 50% change in supply. That is the case of unitary elastic supply. This is 1 degree, first degree. Second degree, ये लिख लिया. Second degree is high elastic or elastic. जब सप्लाई ज्यादा रेस्पॉन्स दिखाती है, प्राइस चेंज कम है. हाई इलास्टिक सप्लाई. High elastic supply or elastic supply. इसमें क्या है? When a given change in price leads more change in quantity supply. When a given change in price leads more change in quantity supply, it is high elastic supply. इसको कहते हैं हम high elastic supply. For example, if 10% change in price leads more than 10% change in quantity supply. 10% कर price change, supply गई 10% for ज़्यादा change. So these are such goods in which producers show more response, high response as compared to price. Here, the value of elasticity of supply is also more than 1. The value of elasticity of supply is more than 1. More than 1. That is, elasticity of supply is more than 1. Which is elasticity of supply more than 1. The supply curve in this case starts from y-axis. Supply curve starts from y-axis. That is above the origin. Yet supply curve starts as y-axis. Which to supply schedule kis aisa. Yat man zyada response supply ukais, kam response price ukais. Price mamuli change gasan, supply variya zyada change gasan. For example, price is 10. This is 100. Quantity supply is 100. For example, 50% change in price. Price increases from 10 to 15 and supply changes by more than 50%. Supply karo is 50% to cut zyada change. You cut 50%, you go 100%. But more than 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%, or 100%. Here, method here 100%. So you can make the supply curve like this. OY shows price and OX shows quantity supply. Supply curve yelti start guys above the origin. Origin ni sure. Origin ni sure. Yet he supply curve start. Supply curve guys start.
Yes, sir.
Yes, from y-axis. SS की supply करो यम सातन origin पर start गए तम सात गए zone की 1 यम सातन तो origin पर start गए ना supply करो इस पर करे origin पर start तम सात गए only supply ये elasticity of supply 1 unitary elastic यम सात ये y axis पर गए start तो गए zone के supply high elastic so here whenever supply करो starts from y axis for example agar ye tat ye 10 ch price hat ch quantity supply agar zan is ya say price hurao price score 15 quantity supply gi 200 so yes must be 50% increase yes must be 100% increase go more than 50% or more than change in price. So this is the case of
Graph will be.
Graph how big,
Yes, sir.
Yim satan supply as high elastic. Tim sat cute graph as,
Yes, sir.
Tim sat as graph simply. Ibanaba graph. OX shows quantity supply and OY shows price. ठीक है? अच्छा है मैं?
Yes, sir.
OY, OX, quantity supply and price. Yim साते supply करो start कैसे y axis पे above the origin. It's not origin. You show origin 0, 0 to origin. Origin you sure कैसे start. For example, ये गई start supply करो. Yim जाए गई start ये तो yim साते start गए तो ये गए जान के supply च more than 1. Elasticity of supply more than 1. अगर जन for example point तो गोडुक point 10 to price. Supply च 100. Price go 15 for example. Supply go 200. So yes, one of us yes go This is
high elastic.
high elastic supply. This is high elastic. In such supply karo start guys above the origin, eh? Y-axis pe.
Yes.
This is high elastic. High elastic supply. Cause degree gay when you tie z degree, eh? Z degree. We go inelastic. What the law is back now inelastic. Inelastic, number third, inelastic supply. Inelastic supply, or you should back now less elastic supply. Less elastic supply. The degree pi jazz, yellow. Price change, the supply change barabar as. It's a prices get changed, it's a supply change, that's one unit elastic. Yim satan price change, I see come the supply change as zyad, that's one of high elastic. Yim satan price change as zyad, supply change as come. So quantity supply changes by less percentage as compared to change in price. That is the case of inelastic supply. So we can write down it when a given change in price leads less change in quantity supply. It is inelastic supply. For example, if 50% change in price leads less than 50% change in quantity supply. Price kur 50% change, magar supply gai less than 50% change. Atmas kya value of elasticity of supply asa? Value of shabash elasticity of supply. Ekis mas barabar 1. Bikis mas kya was?
Yes, sir.
Greater than 1. Yas mas kya is?
Less than.
Less than 1 is less than 1. That is velocity of supply is less than 1. ठीक है? Velocity of supply
Yes, sir.
less than 1. गई आपका दोयम का supply curve is upward sloping but starts from x-axis. Here the supply curve starts from x-axis. Supply curve starts from x-axis. The supply curve starts from x-axis. Yes, must catch it. Supply curve start from x-axis. Supply schedule. We have price and we have quantity supply. For example, price is 50, quantity supply is 100. Price karo is, for example, we change price by 50%. It increases from 50 to 75. There is 25%. There is 25 rupees. 25 is the 50% of 50. 50% of 50. Nimogna option aye punchu go I score 50% price change. The yikaro is less than 50%. Agar zan ye 50% karon change nimok nesab go 50 go dod hat ni ke is thau for example akatu ya akatru busto tu yet tha bota yat mas kaza change ai khabar percentage hua ta tagan karin yat mas I change 50 has original price was 50 into half 51 is 52 was go price change I 50%. Price change I 50%. Which is supply change kazai. Supply change is 20 divided by 100 into 100. 100 cancel. Supply change by 20%. Here this is 20% change. So this is the case of inelastic supply. Yes, must price change zyada as supply change come as. Price change as zyada, supply change as come. The supply curve I start from x-axis. Supply curve starts from x-axis. OY, OX shows quantity supply and OY shows price. The yes must supply curve start from x-axis. SS. Price here, for example, 50, supply 100, price go 75, supply go, for example, 120. This is the case of inelastic supply. Elastic of supply less than 1. You get inelastic supply. Inelastic supply. So when supply change is less than change in price. If a given change in price leads less change in quantity supply. Quantity supply. Now we have the fourth degree.
Sir, 1 minute.
Mahira has also joined. Mahira Khan. सर कैसे ज्वाइन करा है दूसरा स्टार्ट करेंगे ये फोर्थ
सर मैं ग्राफ बनाऊं
हो गया
Yes, sir.
Now you take up the fourth one, fourth degree, perfectly inelastic. Supply. Perfectly inelastic. Huh? Fourth one is perfectly inelastic. This is the case when supply has no change. Supply do not change, but there is change in price. Here, price changes, but supply remains the same. When there is change in price, but supply remains the same. When there is change in price, but supply remains, quantity supply remains the same. Remain the same. Or no change in quantity supply, it is perfectly inelastic supply. Perfectly inelastic supply. So we can say that when change in price do not change the quantity supply, or when change in price do not change quantity supply. Any change in price leads no change in quantity supply, or any change in price. You can explain it in different ways. Any change in price have no effect on supply. No effect on supply. So this is the case of perfectly inelastic supply. The value of elasticity of supply here is what? 0. The value of elasticity of supply is 0. 0. That is elasticity of supply is equal to 0. Elasticity of supply barabar 0 bas. Yim saatte to calculate kariu elasticity of supply. Agar tata 0 draw to guchu wanan ke yasa chu perfectly inelastic supply. The shape of the supply kariu kya asa? It is a vertical line parallel to y-axis. The supply curve is a vertical line parallel to y-axis. So vertical line asa parallel to y-axis. Shabash. Wustod tu agar zan is supply schedule as in this way. We have price and we have quantity supply. For example, price show 10, supply show, for example, 50. Price changes to 20, supply same. Price changes to 30, supply same. Price changes to 40, supply same. So this is the case of perfectly inelastic supply. Perfectly inelastic.
Inelastic.
Yes. Wustod tu diagram kya banes? OX shows quantity supply and OY shows price. Agar zan supply kuru as like this. Supply. Khada line parallel to x-axis. Sorry, y-axis. Y-axis. Yat mano go perfectly inelastic supply. The coefficient of elasticity of supply is 0. This is perfectly inelastic supply. Inelastic supply. Perfectly inelastic supply. Okay?
Yes, sir.
So the last one is perfectly elastic. ये मुकला हुआ?
Yes, sir.
हो गया? Last one is perfectly elastic. Yathma supply change gasan price rosa same. It was price change gasan supply was same rosa. Hoche supply change gasan price same rosa. Fifth one, perfectly elastic supply. Perfectly elastic supply. When quantity supply changes, when quantity supply changes without any change in price, without any change in price, it is perfectly elastic supply. Elastic supply. Perfectly elastic. So when quantity supply of a good changes, but price remains same. Thus, when quantity supply changes without quantity supply changes, but price remains same. But price remains same.
Same.
Yes. Here, yathmos asa value of elasticity of supply infinity. The value of elasticity of supply is infinity. Infinity. That is elasticity of supply is infinity. क्या शास है?
Infinity.
Yes. The shape of the supply curve क्या शास है? It is vertical line or horizontal line. The supply curve is a horizontal line. Is a horizontal line parallel to x-axis. It is parallel to y-axis. It is parallel to y-axis. It is parallel to x-axis. Yes, must catch it. Supply change gas and price was a same. Price was a same. For example, as agar let's put a supply schedule, price, quantity, supply. Price and quantity supply. For example, price 5, supply 10. Price B5, supply 15. Price 5, supply 20. Price 5, supply 25. So, yeli supply change gasam magar price same. This one yasa che perfectly elastic supply. So, which to supply curve kis chasa? OX shows quantity supply and OY shows price. Yes, most simply as a supply curve of this shape. Horizontal line parallel to x-axis. The ES is equal to infinity. Infinity. Eh? Infinity. Yes, go perfectly elastic. Elastic supply. Which does yes must get price yet. For example, price of P. Supply change. Supply changes. Supply is a hooray be, yeah? Big
Yes, sir.
increase, big increase. Supply increase, but price same. Price
Same.
same. This one
Same.
yesterday. Perfectly elastic supply. Eh?
Yes, sir.
Case of perfectly elastic supply. Supply curve in this shape, horizontal line parallel to x-axis. OX shows quantity supply and OY shows price. So this is different degrees of elasticity of supply. Perfectly elastic supply. Unit elastic. You'll supply curve origin per start guys. ठीक है? Unit elastic.
Yes, sir.
You'll supply curve y-axis per start guys. So क्या है? More than 1. X-axis per start as less than 1. ये horizontal vertical line as parallel to you perfectly inelastic.
Perfectly elastic.
Yes, perfectly inelastic. You perfectly inelastic. So you perfectly elastic.
Elastic.
Horizontal line as. So this is all about the different degrees of 5 degrees of elasticity of supply. 5 degrees of elasticity of supply. So methods of measuring elasticity of supply. The method is percentage method, the base geometric method. At like S of lecture. Hardly, eh?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Eh?
Yes, sir.
Pakari save te to batraw ye YouTube us pe te betramo grupos mas, eh?
Yes, sir.
Okay.